Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more philosophy. Today we're diving back into the works of Georg Hegel. This is The Science of Logic. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the science of logic with Section 2, Magnitude, Quantity. Now this is going to be this is a very short little section, kind of an introduction to part 2, and then we get into part 2. We'll go ahead and do the introduction and the next section together. Magnitude, quantity. Let me see if I can get that a little bit better for y'all. That'll work. All right. The difference between quantity and quality has been indicated. Quality is the first immediate determinate-ness. Quantity is the determinate-ness that has become indifferent to being. A limit, which is just as much no limit. Being for itself, which is absolutely identical with being for another. The repulsion of the many ones, which is immediate non-repulsion, their continuity. Because that which exists for itself is now so posited that it does not exclude its other, but rather affirmatively continues in it, it is then otherness, inasmuch as existence surfaces again on this continuity, and its determinateness is at the same time no longer simple self-reference, no longer the immediate determinateness of the existent something, but is posited as repelling itself from itself, as referring to itself in the determinateness rather of an other existence, a being which exists for itself. And since they are at the same time indifferent limits reflected into themselves, and unconnected determinateness is, as such, outside itself, an absolute externality and a something just as external. Such a limit, the indifference of the limit as limit, and the indifference of the something to the limit, constitutes the quantitative determinateness of the something. In the first place, we have to distinguish pure quantity from quantity as determinate from quantum. First, pure quantity is real being for itself, turned back into itself, yet with as yet no determinateness in it, a compact, infinite unity which continues itself into itself. Second, this quantity proceeds to determinateness, and this is posited in it as a determinateness that at the same time is none, is only external. Quantity becomes quantum. Quantum is indifferent determinateness, that is, one that transcends itself, negates itself. As this otherness of otherness, it lapses into infinite progress. Infinite quantum, however, is sublated indifferent determinateness. It is the restoration of quality. Third, quantum in qualitative form is quantitative ratio. Quantum transcends itself only in general, in the ratio. However, it transcends itself into its otherness in such a way that this otherness, in which it has its determination, is at the same time posited is another quantum. With this, we have quantum as turned back into itself and referring to itself as into its otherness. At the foundation of this relation, there still lies the externality of quantum. It is indifferent quanta that relate themselves to each other. That is, they have the reference that mutually connects them in this being outside itself. The ratio, therefore, only a formal unity of quality and quantity. It's dialectic in its transition into its absolute unity in measure. So, if we take the example of a hand, right? The hand exists as a hand. When you start to count the fingers, it becomes determined. Until the point where you start counting the fingers, it is a theoretical hand, but it is a hand in quality. It is a hand. When you start quantifying how many fingers are attached to the hand, then it becomes the quantity of the hand. The hand contains 5 fingers. Now, it can contain 4 fingers or 3 fingers. I know a guy that has these 3 fingers, or actually it's these 3 fingers he's got. And so it can vary in quantity, but the quality of the hand is still that it is a hand. The determining of the fingers is judging the hand for being a hand in what a full hand would be. And so we are judging the quality against the quantity in such a way that it isolates the quality from the concept of a hand. It is no longer just a vague concept that this hand may contain 5 fingers. It is now the quantity that this hand does contain 5 fingers. They relate to themselves. If I had one hand with 5 fingers and one hand with 4 fingers, those quantities are different, but the overarching "this is a hand" remains the same. Hopefully that's clear and correct. Remark. In something, its limit is, as quality, essentially its determinateness. However, if by limit we understand one which is quantitative and, for instance, a field alters its limit in this sense, then the field remains a field just as before. That's what I was just extrapolating, right? I changed fan off. If you change hand instead of field, you will get my example. If, on the contrary, it is the qualitative limit of the field which is altered, what is altered is the determinateness that makes the field a field. And the field then becomes a meadow, a forest, and so on. So if you did not have fingers and the capacity to move them, is it still a hand? Or is it now something different, a nub? All right, so a shade of red, whether brighter or paler, is always red. But if its quality alters, then it ceases to be red and becomes blue, and so on. The determination of magnitude, as quantum just defined, as having for foundation a permanent being which is indifferent to its determinateness, is confirmed in every other example. By the expression magnitude, we understand quantum as in the given examples, not quantity. Essentially, for this reason, this name, drawn in German from a foreign language, quantitas, must be used. The definition of magnitude, given in mathematics, has to do with quantum. A magnitude is normally defined as something that allows for increase or decrease. To increase, however, means to magnify the magnitude of something. To decrease, to minimize it. We have here a difference of magnitude as such from itself, as if it were magnitude that would allow its magnitude to alter. The definition thus proves itself to be awkward, for the very term is used in it that ought to be defined. To avoid using the same term in the definition, the more or less, the magnifying or minimizing, must be resolved into addition, an external affirmation in keeping indeed with the nature of quantum, or subtraction, an equally external negation. The nature of alteration in quantum comes down, in general, to this external mode of both reality and negation. In that imperfect expression, therefore, one cannot fail to recognize the main point at issue, namely, the indifference of the alteration. The concept of alteration itself implies its own more and less, its indifference towards itself. Chapter 1, Quantity. A. Pure quantity. Quantity is sublated being for itself. The repelling one that behaved only negatively towards the excluded one, now that it has gone over in connection with it, behaves towards the other as identical to itself, and has, therefore, lost its determination. Being for itself has passed over into attraction. The absolute obduracy of the one has melted away into this unity, which, however, as containing the one, is at the same time determined by the repulsion residing in it. As unity of this self-externality, it is unity with itself. Attraction is, in this way, the moment of continuity in quantity. Continuity is therefore simple. Self-same reference to itself, unbroken by any limit or exclusion. Not, however, immediate unity, but the unity of ones which have existence for themselves. Still, contained in it is the outside one another of plurality, though at the same time as something without distinctions, unbroken. Plurality is posited in continuity as it is implicitly in itself. In itself. The many are each what the others are. Each is like the other, and the plurality is, consequently, simple and undifferentiated equality. Continuity is this moment of self-equality, of the outsidedness of one another, the self-continuation of the different ones into the ones from which they are distinguished. In continuity, therefore, magnitude immediately possesses the moment of discreteness. Repulsion as now a moment in quantity. Steady continuity is self-equality, but of many that do not become exclusive. It is repulsion that first expands self-equality to continuity. Hence, discreteness is, for its part, a discreteness of confluence, of ones that do not have the void to connect them, not the negative, but their own steady advance, and, in the many, do not interrupt this self-equality. So, many hands that all have the same quantity are going to be continuous, right? Continuous. They are going to be the same. Self-equality, hand, 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 hand. Whenever there is differentiation, that is going to be different. Quantity is at the unity of these moments of continuity and discreteness. At first, however, it is this continuity in the form of one of them, of continuity as a result of the dialectic of the being for itself, which has collapsed into the forms of self-equal immediacy. This hand is equal to this hand is equal to this one. Quantity is as much this simple result insofar as the being for itself has not yet developed its moments and has not posited them within it. Quantity contains these moments at first as being for itself posited in its truth. It was the determination of being in itself to be self-sublating self-reference, a perpetual coming out of itself. But what is repelled is itself. Repulsion is thus a creative flowing away from itself. On account of the sameness of what is repelled, this discerning in unbroken is unbroken continuity. And on account of the coming out of itself, this continuity is at the same time, without being broken off, a plurality which persists just as immediately in its equality with itself. Pure quantity has as yet no limit, nor is it as quantum yet. This is the remark. And even inasmuch as it becomes quantum, it is not restricted by limit, but consists rather precisely in not being restricted by limit, in having the being for itself as a sublated moment in itself. That discreteness is a moment in it can be expressed by saying that quantity in it is in it the ubiquitous real possibility of the one, that the one, conversely, is only simply as absolutely continuous. To a representation not informed by the concept, continuity easily becomes composition. That is to say, an external reciprocal connection of the ones in which the one is retained in its absolute obduracy and exclusiveness, the ideal hand. But the one has shown itself to pass over into attraction in and for itself into its ideality, many hands, many perfect hands. It has shown that continuity, consequently, is not external to it, but belongs to it, and is grounded in its essence, the thing which grabs. But it is just this externality of continuity for the ones to which atomism clings, and representation has difficulty giving it up. Mathematics, on the contrary, rejects a metaphysics that would make time consist of points of time, space in general, or the line in the first instance of points in space, surface of lines, the whole space of surfaces. It gives no credit to such discontinuous ones. Even when it represents the magnitude of a surface, for instance, by determining it as the sum of infinitely many lines, this discreteness counts only as a momentary representation for, since the space which such lines are supposed to constitute still is a restricted one, the sublation of their discreteness is already implicit in the infinity of the plurality. There are infinite variations of hands, most of them are the same. In this concept of pure quantity, as contrasted with a mere figurative representation of it, that Spinoza, for whom the concept had special importance, has in mind when he speaks of quantity as follows. Ethics, Part 1, Proposition 15, Note. All right, let's see if they have a translation of this available. Yes. Quantity is conceived by us in two modes, abstractly or superficially, as we imagine it, or as a substance such as it is produced solely by the intellect. If we attend to quantity as it is in the imagination, which we often and more easily do, it will be found to be finite, divisible, and compounded of parts. But if we attend to it in accordance with the intellect, we conceive of it as substance, which is very difficult to do. It will be found to be infinite, one, and indivisible. It will be plain enough to all who know how to distinguish between the imagination and the intellect. Sorry. If called for, more graphic examples of pure quantity can be drawn from space and time, also from matter in general, from light and so forth, even from the eye, provided that, as already noted, quantity is not understood as quantum, Space, time, and the rest are extensions, pluralities. They are a going out of self, a flowing that does not, however, pass over into the opposite, into quality or the one, but as this coming out of self, are rather a perennial self-producing of their unity. Space is this absolute being outside itself that is equally, absolutely unbroken. A being other over and over again, which is self-identical. Time is an absolute coming out of itself, the generation of a one, of a point in time, a now, which is immediately its coming to nothing, and again, the continuous coming to nothing of this vanishing. So that this self-generation of non-being is just as much simple equality and identity with itself. As regards the matter of quantity, there is one among the 7 still extant propositions of Leibniz's first dissertation, the second, which goes as follows. Footnote 3. It is not altogether improbable that matter and quantity are in reality one and the same. Hegel is citing from the Dutton's edition of Leibniz's work. In fact, these concepts differ only to the extent that quantity is a pure thought determination, whereas matter is quantity in outer concrete existence. The determination of pure quantity extends to the I as well, for the I is an absolute becoming other, an infinite distancing or all-round repulsion that makes for the negative freedom of the being for itself, which, however, remains absolutely simple continuity. The continuity of universality, of self-abiding being, interrupted by infinitely manifold limits, by the concept of sensations, of intuitions, and so forth. Those who resist taking multiplicity as a simple unity, and, besides this concept, namely, that each of the many is the same as every other, that is to say, that each is one of many, for at issue here is not the many as further determined as green, red, and so on, but of the many considered in and for itself. Those who besides this also require a figurative representation of this unity will find plenty such representations in those continua that exhibit the deduced concept of quantity and simple intuition. And again, the already given example of the hand is a good representation of that, right? The idealization is separate from the actuality of. And so once you have the actuality of, it changes the classification of the ideal. The hand in specificity can vary from the hand in concept. Remark 2. The dispute, or the antinomy of the infinite divisibility of space, time, matter, and so on, has its origin in the nature of quantity, that it is this simple unity of discreteness and continuity. This antinomy consists solely in the fact that discreteness must be maintained just as much as continuity. The one-sided claim of discreteness yields infinite or absolute partition. Hence, an indivisible as principle, the one-sided claim of continuity yields infinite divisibility instead. Kant's Critique of Pure Reason sets up 4 cosmological antinomies, the second of which deals with the antithesis to which the moments of quantity give rise. Footnote 4 is just a reference. These Kantian antinomies will always remain an important part of Kantian philosophy. They, above all, cause the downfall of previous metaphysics and can be regarded as a main transition to more for they were particularly instrumental in producing the conviction that the categories of finitude are null on the side of content. And this is a more correct approach than the formal approach of subjective idealism, for which their only defect is that they are allegedly subjective, not in what they are in themselves. However, despite its great service, Kant's exposition of these antinomies is very imperfect, both because it is internally awkward and eccentric, and because of the inappropriateness of its result, which presupposes that cognition has no other forms of thought than finite categories. In both respects, these antinomies deserve a more accurate critique, one that more closely clarifies its standpoint and method, and also extricates the main point at issue from the useless form into which it has been forced. I remark, to begin with, that Kant wanted to give a semblance of completeness to his four antinomies by means of a principle of division, which he took from his schema of categories. However, a more profound insight into the antinomal, or more accurately, into the dialectical nature of reason, reveals that every concept is a unity of opposite moments to which, therefore, the form of antinomial assertion could be given. Becoming, existence, and the rest, and every other concept, could thus each yield its particular antinomy, and as many antinomies as therefore be devised as there are concepts. Ancient skepticism did not spare itself any effort in pointing out this contradiction, the antinomy in every concept which it encountered in the sciences. Further, Kant did not pick the antinomy from the concepts themselves, but from the already concrete form of cosmological determinations. To capture it pure and to deal with it in its simple concept, the thought determinations must not be taken as applied to, and entangled in, the representation of the world, space, time, matter, and so on, but must be considered purely in themselves, without this concrete material, which has no force or authority here. For the thought determinations alone make up the essence and ground of the antinomies. Kant's conception of the antinomies is that they are not sophistic artifices, but contradictions reason must run up against. This last is a Kantian expression, and the view expressed is an important one. As it gains insight into the natural illusion of the antinomies, reason is indeed no longer duped by it, but still deceived. Footnote 5, another reference. The critical solution, namely, through the so-called transcendental ideality of the world of perception, has no other result than to make the so-called conflict into something subjective, wherein, of course, the same illusion still persists, just as undispelled as before. A true solution can only consist in that two determinations, in being opposed and yet necessary to one and the same concept, cannot have their validity in their one-sidedness, each for itself, but have truth, rather, only in their sublated being, in the unity of their concept. On closer inspection, the Kantian antinomies contain nothing more than the wholly simple categorical assertion of each of the two opposed moments of a determination, each on its own, isolated from the other. But this simple categorical, or more appropriately assertorical, claim is then enwrapped in a lopsided, disjointed scaffolding of argumentation that allegedly elicits the semblance of proof, while in fact hiding and rendering unrecognizable the merely assertorical character of the claim, as closer examination will show. The relevant antinomy here concerns the so-called infinite divisibility of matter, and rests on the opposition of the moments of continuity and discreteness that the concepts of quantity contain within itself. As presented by Kant, the thesis in these antinomies go like this. Every composite substance in the world consists of simple parts, and nothing exists anywhere except the simple, or what is composed of the simple. Footnote 6 is another reference, and so is 7. Now, this is everything, every composite substance, everything is composed of simple parts, elements. Nothing exists anywheres except the element and what is composed of the element. Here, the composite is contrasted with the simple, the atom, and, as determination, takes second place to the unbroken or continuous. The substrate given to these abstractions, namely these substances in the world, has no other meaning here than of things perceivable by the senses. It bears no influence on the antinomy itself, and could just as well also be called space or time. Now, since the thesis speaks only of the composition instead of continuity, by that fact it is really an analytical or tautological proposition, that the composite is not one thing in and for itself, but is something only externally put together, that it consists of something other, is its immediate determination. But this something other than the composite is the simple. It is therefore a tautology to say that the composite is made up of the simple. To ask what something consists of is to require the production of something else, the compounding of which constitutes that something. If ink is said to consist of ink again, the meaning of the question regarding the something else of which ink consists is missed. The question is not answered, but simply repeated. The further question would then be whether that of which we speak is supposed to consist of something or not. But, as such, a composite is just that, an aggregate made up of something else. If the simple, which is said to be the other of the composite, is taken to be only a relatively simple, which for itself is composite in turn, then the question stands as before. Figurative representation has in view, say, only this or that composite, to which this or that something might also be assigned as its simple element, although for itself the latter is a composite, but at issue here is the composite as such. Regarding now the Kantian proof of the thesis, like all the Kantian proofs of the remaining antinomial propositions, it takes an apagogic detour, which will prove quite superfluous. Assume, so begins the proof, that composite substances do not consist of simple parts. Then, if all composition is removed in thought, no composite part remains, and since, on the assumption just made, there are no simple parts, there is also no simple part, thus nothing at all. Consequently, no substance would be given. This conclusion is quite correct. If there is nothing but what is composite, and one thinks away all that is composite, nothing at all is left. One will grant this, but one could spare oneself this tautological superfluity by starting the proof directly with this conclusion, namely, either it is impossible to remove all composition in thought, or, after its removal, something must be left over that subsists without composition, that is, the simple. In the first case, however, the composite would not for its part consist of substances, because with these the composition is only an accidental relation of substances, which, without such relation, must subsist as beings subsisting on their own. Now, since this case contradicts the presupposition, there is left only the second, namely, that any composition of substance in the world consists of its simple parts. The very ground which is the main point and makes all that follows superfluous is laid down, by the way, in a parenthesis. The dilemma is this: either the composite persists or it does not, and it is rather the simple that persists. If the first is the case, namely the composite persists, then what persists would not be substances, for composition is to these only an accidental relation, but substances are what persist. Therefore, what persists is the simple. Clearly, the reason, because the composition is only an accidental relation of substances, a relation which is therefore external to them and does not concern the substances themselves, could have been immediately attached as proof to the thesis that the composite substance consists of simple parts without the apagogic detour. If it is correct to say that the composition is accidental, then the essence is surely the simple. However, this accidentality on which everything depends is not proved, but is assumed instead straight out, indeed casually in parenthesis, as something which is self-evident or irrelevant. True, it is self-evident that composition has the determination of accidentality and externality. But if we are to deal here with only an accidental aggregate instead of continuity, then it was not worth the effort to construct an antinomy over it. Or, more to the point, none could be constructed. So the assertion that the parts are simple is then, as said, only a tautology. In order to get this a little bit better, we're going to take it from the atomic level to the subatomic, right? The elements exist. There is hydrogen, helium, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. All of these things exist. They are the elements. They are contiguous. There is no separation between the elements which compose me and the elements which compose the atmosphere, except that of relativity. The accidental that is being described here is better described by the submaterial particles, however, the proton, the neutron, and the electron. In a helium, you have one electron, one proton, one neutron. Now, the number of protons determines the element. You can have variability within the element. Helium is not the best example of that, so we'll move over to hydrogen. Now, hydrogen is 2, 2, and 2 in its normal state. You can have an isotope of hydrogen, and the only isotope which is possible for that is 1 neutron, 2 protons, 2 electrons. That is variability inside of the element. That is, for a good part, accidental, right? That is what is being talked about here. The arrangement of these neutrons determine what the element is. But if you break it down just to the neutrons, they are existing as compositions of an element. The randomness of the assignment of proton, neutron, and electron variability determine the composition, but even the isotope is still helium. And if it picks up another neutron, which I think may be a possibility, and that would be a different isotope, right? That is the full spectrum of hydrogen. Now, that hydrogen can be electrically charged, right? The electrons can pick up more or less charge through the process of ionization. But the neutron, the proton, and the electron are self-existent, existing for themselves. They are also existent for each other, in relation to each other, composing the element. Now, the neutrons are the neutrons, the protons, and the electrons are distinguished by size and charge, and that's about all. And so the randomness that is being talked about here is that variability between the elements. Not necessarily the elements themselves, because those are determined, but they are determined by the makeup of the subatomic particles. Hopefully that is a little bit clear and correct. We thus find, already given in the apocalyptical detour, the very assertion that should result from it. And what is being given here is, he is saying the element is, regardless of the randomness, regardless of the variability within the element is. The proof can therefore be drawn more concisely this way. Assume that substances do not consist of simple parts, but are only composite. But now, all composition can be removed in thought, for it is only an accidental relation. Therefore, after its removal, no substances would be left over unless made up of simple parts. But we must have substances, since we have assumed them. We cannot have everything disappear before us, but something must be left over. And since we have presupposed something permanent that we call substance, this something must therefore be simple. For the sake of completeness, we have also to consider the conclusion, which runs as follows. From this, it directly follows that the things of the world are all simple beings, that composition is only an external state of them, and that reason must think the elementary substances as simple beings, the first plane of existence. Here we see the externality of composition, that is, its accidentality, being adduced as the consequence after it had earlier been introduced parenthetically in the proof and made use of. Kant strongly protests that the conflicting propositions of the antinomies he is not trying to trump up a trick, a proof of the kind, as it is said, that lawyers produce. But the proof in question is not so much to be accused of trickery as it is of useless and strained complexity that only serves to conjure up the external form of a proof. Thus, to obscure the fact that the alleged conclusion is, parenthetically, the nerve of the proof, that there is no proof at all, but only a presupposition. The antithesis goes, no composite thing in the world consists of simple parts, and nowhere in the world exists something simple. That's not true, right? Subatomic particles, right? That is a really good example of this, because being differentiated only by quantity, right? This one is heavier than that one, and that is the separation between them. Because it is heavier, it carries a positive charge. Because this one is lighter, it carries a negative charge. That is the only difference between the fundamental makeup of these individuals. And so it is quality quantified, leading to the quality and the quantification of the compound. There really is no way to separate anything from the subatomic particles that make it up. And so to say that no composite thing in the world consists of simple parts and nowhere in the world exists something simple is contradictory to itself, right? No composite thing consists of simple parts is untrue. Nowhere in the world exists something simple is untrue as well. Everything composite consists of simple parts, and there do indeed exist simple. The proof is likewise sprung in apagogic form and is just as faulty as the previous one, though in a different way. There you go. Assume, it says, that a composite thing such as a substance consists of simple parts. Because every external relation, and consequently also every composition made of substances, is possible only in space, the composite thing must consist of as many parts as the space that occupies also consists in. The space consists not of simple parts, but of spaces. Therefore, each part of the composite thing must occupy a space. True. But the absolutely first parts of everything composite are simple. Therefore, the simple occupies a space. And it does. Now, since every real thing that occupies a space holds within itself a manifold of mutually external parts, is thereby composed, and indeed of substances, it would follow that the simple is a composite substance, which is self-contradictory. And again, we go back to the atom, right? The individual element exists, but it is composed of a manifold of mutually external parts, proton, neutron, electron. And it is a composite substance. Even helium with 1, 1, and 1 is composed of 3 composites. This proof can be called a whole nest, to use an expression elsewhere found in Kant, of fallacious moves. In the first place, the apagogical turn is a baseless illusion, for the assumption that everything substantial is spatial, but that space does not consist of simple parts, is a direct assertion which is made the immediate ground of what is to be proved, and with it the whole proof is already finished. Yes, it is. Space does consist of simple parts. Next, this apagogical proof starts with the proposition: every composition of substances is an external relation, but then, oddly enough, it immediately forgets it, for it goes on to argue that composition is only possible in space, but that space does not consist of simple parts, that, therefore, anything real that takes up space is composite. But once composition has been assumed to be an external relation, just because of this, the spatiality itself, in which alone composition is allegedly possible, is for the substances an external relation that is of no concern to them and does not affect their nature, just like anything else that can be derived from the determination of spatiality. For that very reason, the substances ought not to have been posited in space. It is further presupposed that the space in which the substances have been moved here does not consist of simple parts, since it is an intuition, that is, according to the Kantian definition, a representation which can only be given through one single object, and is not a so-called discursive concept. The widespread nonsense regarding intuition that has grown out of this Kantian distinction between it and the concept is well known, and, in an effort to spare oneself the labor of conceptual comprehension, the value and the sphere of intuition have been extended to all cognition. What is pertinent here is only this, that space, just like intuition itself, must also be conceptualized if one wants to comprehend conceptually at all. And, thus, the question arises whether space would not have to be conceptually grasped as consisting of simple parts, even though as intuition it is simple continuity, or whether space would not run into the same antinomy that applied only to substance. In fact, if the antinomy is abstractly framed, it applies, as we said, to the quantity in general, and thereby equally to space and time. But since it is assumed in the proof that space does not consist of simple parts, this must have been the reason for not transposing the simple into this element which is incompatible with it. Then there is also the clash between continuity of space and composition. The two are mixed together, the former being surreptitiously substituted for the latter, which results in the conclusion with a quaternion terminorium. In Kant, space explicitly has the determination of being one single space, its parts resting only on limitations, so that they do not come before the one all-encompassing space as if they were parts of it from which a composition is possible. Continuity is quite rightly and unequivocally said of space here, as opposed to any composition made of parts. On the other hand, in the argument of the transposing of substances into space is taken to entail a manifold of externally situated parts, and, more particularly, a composite thereby. Yet, as quoted, the manner in which the manifoldness is present in space is explicitly supposed to exclude component parts that antecede the composition and the unity of the space. In the remark to the proof of the antithesis, another fundamental thesis of critical philosophy is expressly brought in, namely, that we have a concept of bodies only as appearances. As such, however, they necessarily presuppose space, which is the condition of the possibility of all external appearances. If by substances only bodies are meant here, such as those which we see, feel, taste, and so on, then, strictly speaking, there is no question of what they are in their concept. At issue are only sense perceptions. The proof of the antithesis, therefore, should have been briefly this. Our whole experience, visual, tactile, and so on, shows us only what is composite. Even the best microscopes and the keenest knives have yet to let us hit upon anything simple. Therefore, reason also should not expect to hit upon anything simple. If we then look into the opposition of this thesis and antithesis, more accurately, freeing their proofs from all idle superfluity and oddity, we find that the proof of the antithesis, by transposing substances into space, dogmatically assumes continuity, just as the proof of the thesis, by assuming composition as the mode of connection of anything substantial, dogmatically assumes the accidentality of this connection, and, consequently, that substances are an absolute one. The whole antinomy, thus, comes down to the separation of the two moments of quantity and the direct assertion of the two, precisely as absolutely separated from each other. When considered from the standpoint of mere discreteness, substance, matter, space, time, and so on are absolutely separate. Their principle is the one. From the standpoint of continuity, this one is sublated. Parting remains divisibility. It remains the possibility of parting as possibility without actually coming to the atom. Now, even if we stay with these oppositions as just defined, we see that the moment of atomicity lies in continuity itself, for continuity is the possibility of parting. And the said parition, the discreteness, also sublates every distinction of the ones, for the simple ones are each what the other is. It thereby equally contains their sameness and, thus, their continuity. Since each of the two opposed sides consists its other within itself, it follows that neither of these determinations, taken alone, has truth, but only their unity does. This is the true dialectical consideration of them, as well as the true result. Infinitely more meaningful and more profound than this Kantian antinomy, just considered, are the dialectical examples of the ancient Eleatic school, especially those dealing with movement, which are likewise based on and find their solution in the concept of quantity. To consider them here also would take us too far afield. They have to do with the concepts of space and time and can be dealt with in the history of philosophy in connection with them. These examples do the greatest honor to the reason of their discoverers. They have the pure being of Parmenides for a result, for they exhibit in them the dissolution of all determinate being and are, thus, in themselves, the flux of Heraclitus. For this reason, they also deserve a more careful examination than the usual explanation that they are just sophisms. This is an assertion that sticks to empirical perception in the manner, which common sense finds so illuminating, of a Diogenes, who, when a dialectician pointed out the contradiction inherent in movement, is said not to have further strained his reason, but, silently walking back and forth, deferred to the witness of the eyes. A claim and refutation which is surely easier to make than to let oneself be drawn into thoughts and pursue the complications which thought itself leads. Indeed, not far-flung thoughts, but the thoughts shaped in ordinary consciousness, resolving them by thoughts alone. The solution that Aristotle gives to these dialectical tropes is contained in his truly speculative concepts of space, time, and movement, and merits high praise. The most famous of his proofs rest on opposing infinite divisibility, imagined as if it were actually carried out, and hence as equivalent to infinite partition, the atoms, to continuity, which applies just as well to time as to space, so that the infinite, that is, abstract plurality, is contained in this continuity only in itself as possibility. The actual as contrasted to abstract plurality and also to abstract continuity is the concreteness of these, space and time themselves, just as, in contrast to space and time, movement and matter are the concrete in turn. What is abstract has being only in itself or as possibility. It is only a moment of something real. Bayle, who in his dictionary finds Aristotle's solution of to the dialectic of Zeno pitiable, does not understand what it means to say that matter is infinitely divisible only as possibility. His retort is that if matter were divisible in infinitum, it would actually contain an infinite aggregate of parts, and would there be, therefore, not an infinite, en puissance, but an infinite that exists really and actually. On the contrary, divisibility itself is already only a possibility, not a concrete existing of parts, and plurality, in general, is posited in continuity only as moment, as sublated. Sharpness of understanding, in which Aristotle is also surely unsurpassed, does not suffice to grasp and to pass judgment on his speculative concepts, no more than the said crudeness of sense representation suffices to refute Zeno's argumentations. The understanding, however sharp, makes the mistake of holding such thought fictions, such abstractions, as an infinite aggregate of parts, to be a thing, something true and actual. But this sensuous consciousness will not let itself be brought beyond empirical content to thoughts. The Kantian resolution of the antinomy likewise consists only in supposing that reason should not overstep sense perception, and should take appearance as it is. The solution ignores the content of the antinomy itself. It does not get to the nature of the concept of the terms that make it up, each of which, isolated by itself, is a nullity, and in itself only the transition into its other, quantity being their unity, and in that unity, their truth. B. Continuous and discrete magnitude. 1. Quantity contains the two moments of continuity and discreteness. It is to be posited in both, in each as a determination. It is already from the start the immediate unity of the two. That is, quantity is itself posited at first only in one of the two determinations, that of continuity, and as such is continuous magnitude. Or, continuity is indeed one of the moments of quantity which is brought to completion only with the other, discreteness. But quantity is concrete unity only insofar as it is the unity of distinct moments. These are to be taken, therefore, also as distinct, without, however, resolving them again into attraction and repulsion, but rather as they truly are, each remaining in its unity with the other, that is, remaining the whole. Continuity is only the compact unity holding together as unity of the discrete. Posited as such, it is no longer only moment, but the whole quantity, continuous magnitude. 2. Immediate quantity is continuous magnitude. Quantity, however, is not such an immediate. Immediacy is a determinateness, the sublated being of which is precisely quantity. Quantity is to be posited, therefore, in the determinateness immanent to it, and this is the one. Quantity is discrete magnitude. Discreteness is, like continuity, a moment of quantity, but is itself also the whole quantity, just because it is a moment in it, the whole, and therefore, as distinct moment, does not diverge from its unity with the other moment. Quantity is the outsideness of one another, as such, and continuous magnitude is this outsideness of one another outwardly positing itself without negation as an internally self-same connectedness. On the other hand, discrete magnitude is this outsideness of one another as discontinuous, as broken off. With this aggregate of ones, however, the aggregate of atom and void, repulsion in general, is not thereby reinstated. Because discrete magnitude is quantity, its discreteness is itself continuous. Such a continuity in the discrete consists in the ones being the same as one another, or in that they have the same unity. Discrete magnitude is therefore the one outside the other of the many ones of a same, not the many ones in general, but posited rather as the many of a unity. Remark: what is overlooked in the ordinary representations of continuous and discrete magnitude is that each of the magnitudes has both moments in it, continuity as well as discreteness, and that the distinction between them depends solely on which of the two is the posited determinateness and which is only implicit. Space, time, matter, and so on are continuous magnitudes in that they are repulsions from themselves, each a flowing out of itself which is not, however, a going over or a relating to a qualitatively other. They possess the absolute possibility that the one may be posited in them anywhere, and this is not the empty possibility of a mere otherness, as when one says that it would be possible for a tree to stand in the place of this stone. They contain in themselves, rather, the principle of the one. It is the one of the determinations constituting them. Conversely, continuity is not to be overlooked in discrete magnitude. This moment, as indicated, is the one as unity. Continuous and discrete magnitudes can be regarded as species of quantity, inasmuch as the latter is posited under the determinacies of its own moments, rather than under some external determinateness. The usual transition from genus to species allows external determinations to accrue to the genus according to a principle of division external to it. Moreover, continuous and discrete magnitudes are not yet quanta. They are quantity itself in one of its two forms. They are called magnitudes in some sense only, insofar that they have this in common with quantum, that they are a determinateness in quantity. C. The limiting of quantity. Discrete magnitude has, first, the one for its principle, and, second, is a plurality of ones. Third, it is essentially continuous. It is the one as at the same time sublated, as unity, the self-containing as much in the discreteness of the ones. Consequently, it is posited as one magnitude, and the one is its determinateness. A one, which in this posited and determinate existence excludes, is a limit to the unity. Discrete magnitude as such is not supposed to be immediately limited, but when distinguished from continuous magnitude, it is an existence and a something, the determinateness of which, and in it also, the first negation and limit is the one. The limit, besides referring to the unity and being of moment of negation in it, is also, as one, self-referred. Thus, it is encompassing limit. The limit here is not first distinct from the something of its existence, but, as one, is essentially this negative point itself. But the being which is here limited is essentially as continuity, and in virtue of this continuity, it transcends the limit, transcends this one, and is indifferent to it. Real, discrete quantity is thus one quantity, or quantum. Quantity as an existence and a something. Since the one, which is a limit, encompasses within it the many ones of discrete quantity, it posits them equally as sublated in it. It is a limit to continuity simply as such, and consequently, the distinction between continuous and discrete magnitude is here indifferent, or, more precisely, is a limit to the continuity of the one just as much as of the other. In this, they both pass over into being quanta. And that is going to bring us to the end of quantity. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. The one, I hold several unconventional beliefs, and one of the things that we talk about quite often over at Infinite Integrations and the Esotericism playlist is the Holy Spirit. Now, I believe in the Trinity, which is the body, the soul, and the spirit. The body is the navigation device. You navigate 5D space with this particular temple of God. The decisions are made by the individualized piece of the divine, which is you. The enacting of those decisions are put into place by the Spirit. Now, to me, the Spirit is quite literally every single atom in existence and all of the space between those atoms, which is tiny, minuscule, right? This helium is separated from this hydrogen simply by the limits of their own electromagnetics, but they bump against each other repeatedly. Sometimes they molecularly bond. All of those existing at the exact same time is the Spirit, or the One. It is quantity undefined. No distinguishment whatsoever between the elements. They are all existing in complete randomness. At the point in which those elements bind together into molecules, they become something else. They are differentiated from the one, that is, all of the elements in their exclusion from each other, into a molecule, which is a quantity of these elements defined. A water molecule has 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. There can be multiples of those. There can be variations within the molecule. All of those are separate from the one, but are entirely contained by the one. And so the distinction really comes down to, where do you draw the line? At what point does it go from being an element to being a molecule? Is it 2 oxygens together? Is that a molecule? Well, yes, it is. It's the one that you breathe that keeps you alive. What about 3 together? That's also a molecule. That's the one that protects us from solar radiation. What about O1? O1 is simply an element. As long as it is differentiated and not into something, it is the one. But at the very moment that it becomes 2 joined into 1, it is differentiated from the 1 while still being contained in the 1. That can be a little bit hard to wrap your mind around, but the quantity here is talking about like the non-subjective quantity. The objective quantity is the water molecule. In idealism, there is a water molecule. It is hydrogen times 2, oxygen times 1. There can be multiples of that, but once you have the multiples, then you're getting away from the idealized quantity into the realized quantity. Hopefully that's a little bit clear. Hopefully I am correct, and hopefully I brought a little bit less confusion. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was stated here. Drop it in the comments below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you have another work that you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even a membership. The bills do not pay themselves. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.